Welcome back. Today is the 26th of February, 2026, and we are back with another episode of This Is Reno Radio and video cast.
We have a lot to talk about.
We do. Kristen, I have never seen anything like what I'm about to tell everybody. I'll just start from the beginning. I don't even know where to start, but I'll just start from the beginning. So sometime last year, I want to say it was in the summer, maybe, I came across this case in the federal court system, and I'll talk about what that system is here in a bit. And the case was, as we've discussed already in a prior podcast, is the case that has since gone viral all over the country, which is this man was gambling at the Peppermill Casino here in Reno, and he was arrested because the casino facial recognition, AI, software, platform, whatever, flagged him as being somebody that he was not. He protested, he produced forms of ID, a real ID, but nevertheless, he was arrested by a Reno police officer. I wrote about this story in November, and it quickly went viral. Although I would like to note that I don't think any other media in Reno has reported on this, any other news media. And after my report, somebody did a video of the body cam footage of this story, and it went viral. And I've just been following the case, watching what happens. To me, it's just another case that I'm reporting on related to the city of Reno, Reno Police Department, local government, whatever. And what happened in early February was there was a new set of documents filed in the case. And it was filed after depositions had been taken in the case with Reno Chief of Police Catherine Nance and the officer Richard Yeager. And the nature of those depositions was they were within a request for the plaintiff in this case to essentially amend their lawsuit, because these depositions revealed a lot more information, and some things happened during the depositions. And so basically there was a request to amend and expand the lawsuit. And what essentially happened was the police officer admitted essentially he made a wrongful arrest because he had never been trained on how to, or whether or not it's even appropriate to arrest somebody based on artificial intelligence or facial recognition. And what happened, or what was disclosed, is that the Reno Police Department had not even trained their officers on this ever, to the best of my knowledge. And I don't think there's any indication that in court filings that that's ever been done until September of 2025, which is, I believe, about 2 years, about 2 years after this lawsuit was filed, or maybe even a year and a half. I'm not sure about the timeline. So they've never held a training until this case was filed, even well after it was filed. And the training basically says AI facial recognition is not enough probable cause to arrest somebody on a trespassing or any other incident. So it was, to me, a natural extension of this story. So I filed another report. And, I need to be clear that I follow court dockets pretty regularly on several cases, a lot of cases actually. And to me, those documents are the best ways to get the most up-to-date current information about conflicts in local court, whether it's criminal or civil. And most of them, as you can tell from our reporting, are related to local government. So I wrote this story a few days after these documents were filed, and a few days after the depositions had occurred, supposedly. And I was shocked. I mean, I'd never seen an officer essentially admit that this was a bad arrest, that he had not been trained. And not only that, and I want to be clear about this, the officer apologized to the plaintiff, the man he arrested. And he admitted that the guy was very polite. He was actually, when the police showed up, he's like, "Thank God you're here. You can verify that my ID is real, and I won't be detained by Peppermill security anymore." Well, instead, he gets placed in handcuffs for about 4 hours, ends up having to go to, after his arrest, ends up having to go to the hospital for shoulder pain and all this stuff. And it becomes a thing, right? Here's kind of where things now go off the rails. The Reno City Attorney's Office is defending the case and or actually defending the officer. And I need to note that in that motion to sort of amend the lawsuit and expand it, based on the officer's admission and his apology to the man who was arrested, they're expanding the case to, I believe, include a Fourth Amendment violation and to add the city of Reno as a defendant in the case. So that's what the request was. Well, the Reno City Attorney's Office filed a response to that. And the attorney is Alice Herbolsheimer, who I do not know. I wouldn't recognize her if I saw her. Alice Herbolsheimer with the city attorney's office filed a rebuttal to Terry Kaiser Cooper. And in that rebuttal, she completely fabricates a conspiracy involving me.
Well, you were reading court documents. I mean, there you go.
I want to pull up a quote here. I mean, this is I have never seen anything like this. In Herbolsheimer, City of Reno's response to Terry Kaiser Cooper, Herbolsheimer says, despite the fact that there was no public record of Officer Jaeger's deposition having taken place on Thursday, January 22nd, Bob Conrad reported on the deposition 5 days later on Tuesday, January 27th. So actually, I reported on this at the end of January, not in February. The article contained information that had been disclosed in discovery, but not reflected in plaintiff's motion filed on January 25th, or in any other document filed in the court. This information had never been made public in a court filing and was only known to the parties and their attorneys, yet somehow Bob Conrad was in possession of this information.
Wow. How did you get that information, Bob?
It was in the document she was responding to. I read this and I was like, what is happening? So Herbolsheimer with I'm just going to call her Alice. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing her last name correctly. I'm just going to call her Alice. Alice with the city of Reno. Then apparently asked Terry Kaiser Cooper how much she's been talking to me and what kind of communications we've had and this, that, and the other. So this is also what she said in this file. Coincidentally, she's saying this is after the deposition had occurred. Coincidentally, Bob Conrad called plaintiff's counsel right after Officer Jaeger's deposition, even though there was no public record of the deposition having taken place, and plaintiff's counsel told him that she had just filed a new pleading with the court.
How would Alice know that you called Kaiser Cooper?
How would the city attorney's office know who I'm talking to and when?
Well,
Question
and
number
aside from
one.
the fact that you didn't even call Kaiser Cooper, you got this straight from court filings.
Yeah, So I'm reading this and I'm going, holy wow. This is where it even gets more astounding. Alice with the city attorney's office then requests the federal court judge in this case to refer Terry Kaiser Cooper to the Nevada State Bar for investigation and possible discipline for allegedly doing all these things. And the other thing that came out in these documents is that allegedly the officer's been getting death threats and as a result of media coverage. And in Alice's filing, she specifically mentions me and This Is Reno. No other media is mentioned. I mean, this story has been national for months. That video on YouTube of the body-worn camera footage of the incident has over 3.5 million views, last I checked. And plus, there's been stories all over the internet about this case, again, except for the Reno news media. And
as much as I'd like to think that we have millions of readers at This Is Reno, we do not.
Not this month.
Not this month. And so to single our publication out when this has gone national.
Yeah, and obviously gone national to much greater degrees than our written reporting on this. So I'm in a little bit of a pickle here. I could have just ran with this story that the city attorney's office is making up a whole bunch of shit in this case that's blatantly false. And then I think, and maybe you and I talked about it. I know I've talked about it with a few other people, but I basically just said, look, I could either just do this story that this case has gone off the rails and all these weird allegations are being made in court files. But I just decided, you know what, I'm just going to email her, Alice, the city attorney's office, and just say, hey, what you wrote is not correct. And so I wrote her on the 13th. And
which was part of President's Day weekend.
Friday the 13th. So yes. Just before President's Day weekend. Yes, correct. And I said, look, I check court dockets regularly, and I was surprised. Frankly, I was appalled, but I said I was surprised to see my name in your latest filing. I said, the information quoted in my last article came directly from the draft of the First Amended complaint that was attached as an exhibit that you were responding to. And she was also concerned about this deposition that she said had never been made public. That's literally, I think, on the third page of the other document that was filed by Terry Kaiser Cooper. And there's one more thing I have to mention, because as part of this conspiracy involving me, she questions why I would independently call DMV and ask them about this case. Now, I want to say, here's what happened. So this officer, as he's arresting this guy, says on body cam footage, he says, well, I've known that people have hookups at DMV and they can get fake IDs. It happens all the time in my experience as a law enforcement officer. This also goes in a declaration by him. And I'm going, well, hold on a second. It happens all the time that people can just create fake IDs because they have a buddy at DMV.
So did you do some news gathering on this?
That alone would be a headline. So my second story, I had already contacted DMV and said, look, I'm working on this story, on this case. This came out, and I want your, tell me what happens. Is this possible? Are there hookups at DMV? What's going on here? So I contacted DMV, and I said, hi, I'm working on a story, and this is back in December. I said, I'm working on a story when it was alleged that there were employees at DMV who have given out fake real IDs to people. My questions are, has this ever happened? If so, how often? How many cases has DMV found in such practices? If this has occurred, have any DMV employees lost their job over giving fake IDs? Just basic stuff. Because, when I heard the officer say that and when I saw that in his declaration, I'm like, that's bullshit. I mean, come on. Here's the response I get back from DMV, the spokesperson. I said, the question was, has this ever happened? And she writes back, the last case we know of was the one that was outlined in the media report in 2011.
So it's been a while.
That was pre-Real ID. No other cases since. No other detected cases since. And I said, well, if this were to happen, would the employees lose their jobs or what would? And so she writes back and said, if we ever have found an employee intentionally issuing fake IDs, we would take action to terminate employment. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Speaking of facial recognition, this kind of ties into the whole story. She says, for additional context, the Peppermill's facial recognition system may recognize the subject's face, but will only tie it to whatever record they entered into their own system based on previous contacts, not ours. So if he had a different fake ID the first time and then a new one the second, that might explain how the officer couldn't ID him. I'd prefer to know from the officer, however, whether he ran either of his IDs and came back with a legitimate driver's license number, which, by the way, he did, that matched the facial recognition record and the presented ID. If not, it's likely at least one of the IDs were counterfeit or stolen. It is highly unlikely that he had two actual driver's licenses issued to him from DNV in different names, our facial recognition system would flag that. So I did this, back in December, and I had requested comment from Terry Kaiser Cooper. I don't believe I even got comment back on this, but she was aware that I had looked into
Mhm.
this line of inquiry,
And
and
and it's often fairly normal for us not to get a response from attorneys in an open case.
100%, yeah. And I need to be clear too about something. I hardly a week goes by that I don't speak with an attorney about something related to local news, and I'm not going to divulge who I talk to, when I talk to them, how often I talk to them, what I talk to them about. The minute I do that, nobody's going to talk to me, and we learned that in you know basic news reporting
Journalism
class.
101.
Yeah. So after I told Alice at the city attorney's office, she responds, "Oh, thank you for bringing this attention to my attention. I'm away for the weekend, but I will check the page and line references you have provided as soon as I'm back to the office on Tuesday. If there was a mistake or oversight on my part, I will absolutely file an errata. In the meantime, are you able to confirm that Ms. Kaiser Cooper has not had any discussions or communications with you regarding this case other than to direct you to the court filings?" A government attorney wants to know who I've been talking to.
Nothing
uh,
fishy there.
yeah, and so I was a little alarmed by that response, and so I responded back and I said, "Well, look, I'm just going to spell this out for you." I sent her screenshots of what she written that was saying that didn't exist in the public record. I put the page number, I attached the documents, and I said, uh, "I'm attaching the relevant files so that you have them, although I believe they were the documents that you were responding to." And then I told her, of course, I'm not going to discuss what sources I have or anything like that. So I'm thinking, okay, I'm trying to be professional, and I would want somebody to tell me as if I made a mistake like that. I mean, as you know, Kristen, we correct errors all the time.
All the
Why don't
time.
you talk about our correction and error policy?
Yeah, so we often I mean, I won't say often, it's not like we're making mistakes left and right, but when we do get a correction to a story, for example, we got one just this week. Someone sent us a correction through the contact us form. We check the story. If it's a pretty straightforward correction, we're missing a word, we've got a typo, we've got a name spelled wrong, we'll make that fix. If it's a larger, contextual or factual error that we have, we correct it and we make a notation at the bottom of the story that it's been corrected so that people know that we're being transparent about changes to our stories. And sometimes we get requests for correction that aren't really a correction. It's more of someone has a different perspective than we do. And so we actually have a conversation internally of, is this important to the story? Does this change the context? Or is this just a correction that's more vanity focused? And so we will evaluate those, but we always make the corrections that are journalistically appropriate and then make a comment down at the bottom of the story so that our readers know that those edits have been made.
Yeah, and I will tell you, philosophically and personally, the reason I am so happy that we do that is because for years I've seen local media in this market completely just make stuff up and not correct blatant factual errors and say screw you, blah blah blah. And it's, to me it's just hideous, sleazy journalism. And so that's why we're pretty aggressive about that. And there's been times where we've completely botched certain things, or things have changed after the fact that, by the time we published it, it was different, whatever the case. And by and large, we tend to correct these things within hours, if not at minimum 1 business day. So I was expecting an errata on Tuesday. It
Did
didn't
that
show up.
No, didn't show up.
It didn't
Well,
show up on
Tuesday was a
Wednesday.
snow day.
Didn't show
Wednesday
up
was
on
a
Thursday.
Wednesday was a snow day, and I think wasn't Thursday a snow day as well?
It was, yeah. We were kind of snowed in. So, uh, you know, I contacted her immediately, just as a professional courtesy, which by the way, I'm never going to do that again with the city attorney's office, and you'll see why here in a second. You've made it clear why we have an open corrections policy, and we correct and update stories all the time as soon as we can. This attorney waited a full week to correct some of these statements. And I get an alert on Friday that the case has been updated with a new filing by Alice. A week after I informed her about the error of her ways. And what she filed was an errata and a new declaration, but she failed to correct or clarify several things. And I, again, this week requested additional corrections. And I'll just tell you what I asked for, because I think it's pretty important to note that there's still a lot of misinformation in this case, because she only corrected the fact that she missed in the Terry Kaiser Cooper declaration information that I had quoted, and then her motion to expand the case. She only corrected the fact that she missed that. And she essentially says, well, I did a search on that PDF for the word cocky. And I'll tell you why that's important here in a second. And no results showed up. And the reason that word cocky is important is because here's what Terry Kaiser Cooper wrote back in late January. She said, a city attorney, I think a city prosecutor, wrote emails indicating that she had received a call from the plaintiff's previous attorney who did the criminal defense against him after he'd been arrested by Reno Police. And so Miss Drake wrote emails indicating she had received a call from the attorney asking her to dismiss the case. She wrote she considered him cocky and would love to find a way to prove the case against Killinger. The guy's name is Jason Killinger, because his lawyer was cocky. Miss Drake did agree to dismiss the case, but without prejudice, stating she was referring the case to an RPD fraud detective for further investigation. So after there's no evidence that this guy should have been arrested, they still continue to, essentially try to prosecute him. So I reported that.
And it's interesting to see that they're calling his attorney cocky.
So here's what's strange. She searched that file for the word cocky and it didn't show up. And by the way, I searched it too. It doesn't show up. And there's a very obvious reason why. Do you know why it wouldn't show up in a PDF search of a PDF?
Because it's usually, aren't they kind of scanned, or they're not very searchable?
Right. If you scan or copy, and if it doesn't come direct as a PDF from a word processor or whatever, but you print it out and then scan it, it may not be searchable. And that's exactly what happened here. But I didn't search the PDF. I just read those files and wrote my report. This week, after I read her errata, I emailed her on, I believe, Monday this week. And I said, look, I don't think your errata sufficiently covered the errors that you made in your opposition. She still did not retract the statement that I called Terry Kaiser Cooper right after this deposition, that I was aware of the deposition taking place because Terry Kaiser Cooper supposedly tipped me off to it. And while she did admit that it was in the case files, how she could have missed this, I don't know.
Maybe she searched for it.
So I just asked her, I said, I would like this to be corrected. I did not call and I said, alternatively, please provide evidence that I made this call. And this is what we talked about. And the other issue is that she's blaming me, essentially inferring that This Is Reno's news coverage or coverage of this case has led to this officer getting death threats. She doesn't mention this online video that's got 3.5 million views. She doesn't mention all the copycat videos of this case, all the other, publications that have written about it, or, other websites. I saw it on a law firm's website that actually had a whole sort of AI analysis of the case, which, by the way, Chat for Brains apparently thinks this case has merit. So anyway, I asked her to clarify that. And then I asked her to, I had already told her that, look, the DMV angle was self-evident. It was a BS statement. I told her there's an old adage in journalism. If your mother says she loves you, check it out, right? We've all heard that in journalism. We check our facts, or we strive to check our facts. And I said, look, the record continues to allege that Terry Kaiser Cooper put me up to this DMV angle. And Terry Kaiser Cooper has also rebutted this, as well as I have. Alice with the city attorney's office still leaves it in her declaration and says, well, I just can't fathom, or I had a difficult time comprehending why Mr. Conrad would conduct independent investigation. And I'm going,
She does not understand the news media.
Am I in her mind too feeble-minded and too feral to come up with ideas of my own?
Journalists. Ugh.
So, I mean, this is nuts. So I requested all this, these 3 corrections, essentially clarifications. And then I asked her also, why did it take you a week? It's my understanding attorneys have to be candid and truthful in court. And again, if you compare how we handle our corrections versus apparently how the city of Reno handles corrections, they get to do it when they want, at their leisure. Maybe they were snowed in. Apparently she was, wasn't in the office, but I don't know if she was able to communicate by email, whatever. And then I asked several more questions about the case. Her response is, she was snowed in, wasn't, delayed because of the storm, whatever. Is not going to comment on pending litigation, but she believes her errata sufficiently covers what needs to be corrected factually. Lastly, whatever else you may subjectively imply from the court filings is simply your interpretation of what you assume is being implied, but it is not, in fact, what I have stated.
That's some serious gaslighting, Bob.
Legal gaslighting. I'm very familiar with this, by the way, from both the city of Reno and Washoe County District Attorney's Office. They did me dirty a couple of years ago and filed a completely bogus motion about a case that we were able to easily rebut. And of course, the judge just, glossed right over and pretended like it didn't even happen. But, that's how local judges are sometimes, apparently. So I thought her response was rather rude. And this whole thing is just, improper, in my opinion. Since I'm not going to get apparently any answers from the city attorney's office, which is fine, but I then issued a bunch of questions to the city of Reno. And I just said, look, is this the city of Reno's position that this is all happening and this is all okay, and you get to take a week to correct the record in court and so on and so forth? And I sort of outlined the case, attached some of the filings. And you ready for the response? I love this response, Kristen. This was amazing. You ready? All these questions, all this time I put into it. Hi, Bob. The city attorney's office does not discuss active litigation and believes these matters are best addressed through the judicial process. I think they're also best addressed on this podcast today, too.
Yeah.
So I want to tell you where this is now. I mean, this whole thing, and then there's a bunch of other stuff I need to get to as well, because there's, even in these filings, there's stuff I haven't even talked about that I think are just amazing as far as how this case is going. But Terry Kaiser Cooper on, what day was it? 2/21. So February 21st, files her reply in support of motion for leave to amend. So she essentially completely counteracts everything Alice at the city attorney's office says. And the fact that Alice wants her referred to the state bar for allegedly conspiring with me to, change the nature or influence the outcome of this case by my reporting, whatever the case is. So here's what Terry Kaiser Cooper said. She said, well, first of all, when the officer apologized to the plaintiff, Alice with the city attorney's office said that was a demand by Terry Kaiser Cooper. So I'm just going to read you a direct quote here. Miss Herbolsheimer falsely asserts that Miss Carrie Kaiser Cooper demanded an apology from Jaeger for his admitted wrongful arrest of Killinger on the basis that such an apology is not relevant. She also claims that the demand for an apology was made to embarrass Jaeger and to publicize the apology, knowing that a certain journalist, Bob Conrad, would likely report on it. This is preposterous. As for demanding Jaeger apologize, that too is false. Jaeger admitted in his deposition voluntarily that he had taken a completely innocent man to jail. He sounded repentant and sorry. Miss Kaiser Cooper asked him, not demanded of him, if he was willing to apologize, and immediately agreed and said absolutely. Which, by the way, I read the deposition. That's exactly what happened. Third, Miss Herbolsheimer falsely alleges that Miss Kaiser Cooper communicated with Mr. Conrad information that was not in the public record in violation of the ethics rules regarding trial publicity, blah, blah, blah. We've already discussed how that is bogus. But she said that to want to, basically get Terry Kaiser Cooper in trouble. She, in response, basically just completely blasted this bogus response by the city. And I'm going to publish all of these documents. I'm going to be doing a story on this. Frankly, I don't even know where to begin because it's just, again, as I said, I have never seen anything quite like this. Questions? Do you have any questions? Because I got more to go through.
No, I mean, I think it's nuts that it seems like she's just concocted this entire story of what happened because she didn't do her homework and read her case filings completely, which is a little bit frightening because, attorneys, you rely on them to represent you in really important matters. And she's representing the city. It's a huge government organization. So to not be well versed in the case that you're arguing and reading the documents and pleadings in it, and then making up a conspiracy theory about it is just, it's wild.
There's so many wild things in these files that I'm going to have to report on later. This officer admits to arresting hundreds of people using facial recognition as the sole source of the basis for the arrest. Even though the city is now saying and training some of its officers, not all, that this is not enough probable cause to be doing this.
And that's frightening because how many cases could be opened up and overturned or retried?
Well, that was one of my questions to the city, that at least through the time that we're speaking, the only response I've got was that, short response basically saying this will be addressed in court. I asked, I said, how many arrests have been made on facial recognition software? Are you looking into them? Are you reviewing them for, possible, error, so on and so forth? And to date, they have not responded. So again, I'm trying to do due diligence about, basic information that you would do for a news story. The other thing that's fascinating is that Alice, the attorney, in these depositions, and by the way, she even published some of the depositions in her own response. So I'm going, well, now I have more to report. She objects to almost every single question that Terry Kaiser Cooper asks. And when Terry Kaiser Cooper is deposing Chief Nance, one of the, and I'll just give you an example of an objection. So Terry Kaiser Cooper says to Chief Nance, so in your view, facial recognition training is not essential for officers. Nice if they had it, but if they don't have it, it's not a big deal. Is that right? That was the question Terry Kaiser Cooper asked. Herbolsheimer, objection, vague as to time. And it's constant in these depositions, objection, and just, it seems like just random crap thrown at the wall for why she's objecting. It's frankly obnoxious to read. So, I mean, there is so much stuff. And I'm going to speculate. I think there's three things happening here. As I mentioned, I've caught local government attorneys lying in court more than once. In the case I mentioned before, the Washoe County, I was denied a records request for 911 calls in a particular case or a transcript of the calls because they said, well, this is private information. It involved the then city attorney or city manager, Doug Thornley. There was a domestic violence call to his house. They did almost completely deny the records request. Well, I had known that Washoe County Sheriff's Office had actually provided completely unredacted 911 calls for domestic violence incidents from one private party to another. But in my case, they completely redacted everything because it was Doug Thornley. And so when we challenged the county on that, they filed this really bogus response. It was basically saying it. I mean, at the end of the day, it was clear they hadn't even read what we had submitted and or read it accurately. And so we had to file a rebuttal pointing out their falsity. So I think a lot of these attorneys feel somewhat emboldened to not be completely candid with courts, at least from what I've seen. And I think the reason for that is local judges, particularly in Second Judicial District Court, seem to just let these kinds of things happen with no skeptical eye on it or any kind of sanctions or punitive measures or anything like that. You just basically ignore it. I mean, the city of Reno, in one of our cases, filed a completely false affidavit that we were, again, able to prove was false. And the judge just went, that's your opinion. So it's nuts. So I think that's part of what's happening. I think the other issue in this particular case is, there's a saying in the legal world that if you have the law, then argue the law. If you have the facts, argue the facts. If you have neither, attack your opponent. I think that's what's happening here. And this case is wild. I'm going to keep reporting on it. In fact, I'm going to probably report on it even more until, something happens. And by the way, when I report on these cases, at the end of the day, I have no dog in this fight. I don't care which way they go. If they go against the plaintiff or for the plaintiff or whatever, I'm going to report that. That's just how these things happen. So that's my approach. That's what happened. And I am just astonished by the turn of events in this case. I, again, have never seen anything like this.
Yeah. I I think it's pretty wild that you have been dragged into this when I mean, I think that there was some question as to why are we reporting this, and it's like why does the news media report anything? It's because things like this can happen to anyone. I mean, the Killinger arrest, that sort of thing could happen to anyone. AI is being increasingly used everywhere. But then, to find information on a court pleading that is online and public record, and then be accused of colluding and having a conspiracy to obtain that information. I mean, anyone that goes online and finds information that someone thinks they shouldn't have, are they going to be accused of some sort of conspiracy? It's just absolutely nuts.
Yeah, it's and especially when it's clear she either didn't read it or didn't read it closely. I mean, if I could find this in my just regular reading of court documents and report a story, there's no reason the attorney who's actually on the case can't find that same information. And so that's just bizarre that happened. And so I also have to say one thing about how I found this case, because somewhere along the way in the reporting of this in the last few months, I have mentioned, and it might have been on this podcast, that I found this case just by randomly doing a search for Reno Police. That's not true. Reno Police is not a party to this case, nor is the city of Reno yet. So there's no way I could have found this case by my usual search terms, which I have literally flagged in the court's document. And by the way, the secret sauce to all of this is it's called PACER. I think it's public access to court records or whatever. It's just called PACER, and you can just go on, create an account. It's very expensive, so you have to be careful about how much you search and download. But there's another thing. It's called Court Listener that I use too, and you can follow cases there. Another one, I think it's called Pacer Monitor, that monitors cases. So you can find all sorts of data on federal cases and who the plaintiffs are, when documents are filed, and if other people have downloaded them, then you can download them for free. So that's the conspiracy, is I use public records to report.
Well, and
And
if you didn't search Reno Police, how did you find this case?
Good question. It took me a while to remember what happened. So, do you remember this story I did? I think it was like last September on the UPS warehouse and the employees complaining about the working conditions.
Yes, it was very hot, and there was the story about the construction and sparks falling on people. I remember that detail.
So, again, I got to be careful about how I say this, but I was tipped off that a UPS driver had an active lawsuit against UPS. And so as I was researching this case, I was looking for UPS cases, blah, 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 blah. And then I got this last name of the plaintiff in this case. Guess what it was?
Killinger.
Killinger. The same guy has a case against UPS. When I put his name into Pacer, this case with RPD came up. And I went, click, what's this one? And I saw Terry Kaiser Cooper's name, and I was like, whoa, this is a City of Reno case, even though the City of Reno's not on it. And by the way, I need to tell you, I will say this. I have heard of Terry Kaiser Cooper for decades. She's one of very few civil rights attorneys in town. And I will tell you, in the last week, Kristen, I've had 2 people call me or email me wanting references to civil rights attorneys. And one guy, I will just tell you, said, I've called everyone, every law firm in town, and nobody will take my case because it's up against the City of Reno and the Reno Police Department.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
How the hell can anyone in this community get adequate legal representation against police agencies that are violating people's civil rights if attorneys won't take their cases? Apparently, Terry Kaiser Cooper is one of the few people that's been doing it. I think in her declaration, she said she's been doing this for decades. She doesn't even charge her clients money. She relies on settlements or wins to pay herself. And she apparently has been fighting police abuse for decades. And she's one of the only people, and she doesn't even live here. I think her address is in like New Mexico. At least that's what I saw in one of the court documents. When we get requests like who can help me, I've got a list of a few people. I say you could try this person, this person, this person. You know, I know they do good work and have taken on similar cases, but you know, I think there's a little bit of a strange environment in Reno where a lot of injustice is occurring because people can't find adequate legal representation. And I've heard that too about other certain local agencies, like, well, the University of Nevada, Reno.
Yes.
Apparently, very few law firms in Reno, the Reno area, will sue the university.
Well, and I think part of it is that there's too many conflicts. So
Correct.
attorneys have, conflict, they're not allowed to have certain conflicts. And so there's so many attorneys, I think, that work with the city and the university that people have a hard time finding not only an attorney who works in the field, in the segment of the law that they are, looking at, employment law or civil rights law, but then they have to find somebody that practices that type of law who doesn't have a conflict. And
Yeah, so they
it's
go out of state or Las
Mhm.
Vegas, and yeah, frankly, a lot of Las Vegas firms won't sue the university system. That's scary. I mean, think about the amount of abuse of civil rights and Fourth Amendment rights and First Amendment rights that we see that we've reported on, and the fact that these people likely will not get a fair shake in court simply because they can't afford adequate legal representation, or they just simply can't find attorneys to take their cases.
Yeah.
That is
I mean, for how
scary.
many stories we've reported, how many cases have never even been filed?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what else to say about this. I mean, this case is off the rails, and it's gotten way off the rails in the past 2 weeks, based on these court filings, and the fact that I somehow in the middle of it is just kind of blows my mind.
So we'll keep reporting.
Absolutely, we will. This case is on hot alert in my inbox.
I don't think we have time for anything else today. It's been a busy 45 minutes of
Rant.
a lot of
Uh,
information.
yeah, and I will apologize. I think there's no real other way to cover the wild twists and turns of this case without doing it in this sort of, you know, improv format, via podcast. I don't know how I'm gonna do this story. We'll probably publish it on Sunday, and if there's any new information that transpires, like, I don't think we'll see another errata filed in court in the next few days, or the city, apologizing for acting like weirdos, but, uh, if that happens, we'll report it, but, I think people need to know about this. This is pretty egregious, and the fact that this attorney wanted to refer the plaintiff's attorney to the state bar when she didn't even read her own files that she was responding to, or at least that's the appearance of what happened, is just bonkers to me.
Well, I look forward to, reading your
Yeah.
story.
Thank you. Thanks for listening, everybody. We're gonna shut it down and keep
Thanks.
following us on This Is Reno, and we'll keep reporting on this stuff. Thank you.